Moving forward, we got to install our harmonic balancer, but just pausing to show you while I was working on this, I came up with an idea, threw it together. I built this simple little puller here, and the idea is once you remove your shiv, take your bolts out, remove your shiv, and now you've got all your bolts there. This is a little puller that I built. All it is a piece of 1-inch square tubing. I drilled 3 holes, all through on both sides there. I welded a nut on here, and then this is my jack bolt, and then I went one step further and I welded a socket on there so that you could use a ratchet while you're operating this. I also have a nut welded on the end there. So the idea is a nut welded here, nut welded here. When you're not using it, you'd take this, you'd thread it all the way in there, and then on this side I have these 2 bolts that go here and here, and I have 2 nuts welded here, and I have another 2 nuts inside here, and that's what they're threading into. So this would thread in all the way, and then they would just be staggered. This one would thread all the way down to just above this one here, kind of like so. And if you look on the end, that's where they interfere with each other. You unscrew that out of there. If you can see down in there, I have the threaded nut down in below. It's roughly about here. And then these top 2 nuts that are tacked on the end, those are drilled through. They're just a guide to kind of hold it. You remove these 2 out of the end, you remove that out of that end there. Once you remove these 2 out of this end and that one out of that end, you're ready to use this thing. What you need to do is you take this washer off the bolt on the end of the crankshaft, and that head goes through the bore. So you just have this threaded in to your crankshaft. You'd take your puller here, you line it up with your 2 bolts that you're going to use. One there, one there, and then the last thing to do is to thread this through, and it's going to push off of that bolt down there, and it's going to pull your harmonic balancer out. Okay, so after that then, what we had going on here was, if you take a look, you can see where we've got, some wear. And right there is the bad spot. That's a big gouge in there that may have been, you can see some wear in here, but it might be this piece here that would cause somebody to use a sleeve on that. So here's the old sleeve that was used, but if we look in here and you feel with your thumb, there is an actual groove in here, so we need to replace this. Get yourself a new one with your kit, and that's going to go over top like that. And then I'm just going to use a rubber mallet, and I'm going to use this block of wood. The wood only got it up to the top of here, and then that's as far as it would go. So we had to get ourselves a piece of pipe to go on there. Like this is our ridge that we're using to hammer that thing down. So just get a piece of pipe, and you can see that the clearance in there is just grabbing that edge. And then again, we're going to grab the wood and the mallet, and we're going to hammer this down. It does not go down all the way. This is where it wants to stop because it's contacting tight here as well as there. This is going to be lots of room for the front crank seal to contact. We'd remove this plug on the driver's side, bottom of the block here, to drain out all the coolant. And now we're going to put it back in. We don't want to forget that, so we'll put that in first. Use a little pipe dope, help seal it up, and put that pipe plug back in. Once we're satisfied that our timing chain is set up properly, then we can finish install everything. So first thing we want to do is we want to torque up that bolt. Spec on that, the manual says 50 foot-pounds, so torque that to 50 foot-pounds. Timing chain is now installed. I got some brake cleaner, cleaned up all our gasket surfaces here, and then we get ready to final install the timing cover. As always, what I like to do is I like to put a thin bead of silicone around the outside of the seal. Then I'll just use something that covers the whole seal like that, and then a piece of steel, round, square stock, whatever you got, and then I just hammer that down, and then I'll just kind of move it around like this as I'm hammering it down to get it equal and even until it bottoms out. There should be a lip on the bottom side of this so that it'll bottom out, and then it's fully installed. You may be able to see that lip in there, maybe not, but there is a lip in there that bottoms it out. This gasket here, so I use some RTV sealant, and I've got that glued down, and it's on here, it's good. So the idea being that it's easier to remove the gasket on the timing chain cover once it's out of the vehicle, rather than the gasket still on the engine block inside the vehicle. We got the silicone smeared on there, and I've just kind of smeared it evenly across all of the surface all the way through. And you don't need a lot, because this portion here will sit in tight as you put it in. In fact, you will probably need a pry bar or a punch or something like that in order to line these bolts up as you're installing it. So you don't need a lot of silicone, but you know, enough that we get a good full seal. We don't want no leaks on the bottom. Timing chain covers on. Don't be scared to put some RTV sealant on the threads on the bottom 4 bolts, especially that one there, which goes into the cooling jacket. So I put some RTV sealant on those. We put that on. We got it torqued down. 3/8 is about 30 foot-pounds. The 2 bottom at 5/16 are going to be about 20 foot-pounds. Put on the harmonic balancer. When we're putting that on, I put a little bit of grease on the outside of the that sleeve that we installed, so it'll slide over that seal real nice. You just line it up with the key and you get it on as far as you can, and then I just torqued it up with the impact. So I don't even know what the torque is, likely 100 some odd pounds, but I've always ever just used the 1/2-inch impact, get that on there, and then the bolts for the shiv down here, those are 5/16, so again that'll be 20 foot-pounds. Over here on the bench, I got the RTV sealant on the pump. We'll put the gasket on, so got that sit and tack up before we install it. Again, these are going to be 3/8 bolts, so they should be about 30 foot-pounds when we install that. Got the water pump on, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts on there. All 3/8, that's 30 foot-pounds. These long ones here, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those ones go all the way through to the block. Bottom 2, I do believe, are into the water jackets. So again, you can put some RTV sealant on those. This top one and the 2 bottom ones just go into the timing cover. So if you wish, you could use some anti-seize on that. And then when we get over here, we have this pipe here to this hose. And what I did was, I like to double clamp it now, after I had trouble before with that other Jeep. Sometimes these factory clamps don't have enough tension, and then you get a weep out of here. So I just doubled it up. I got the gear clamp and this pinch clamp here on this. And then there's gonna be a 7/16 to hold it there. Use a little bit of Vaseline. There's an O-ring, push that in there. And then in here, this space, that's gonna be for our bracket that goes in. So these clamps, this is kind of like an upgraded clamp that I've got, and it is a superior clamp, but it's not as fast and easy to use as the gear clamp or the pinch clamp. So I had to make sure that I put these in such a way that our bracketry will fit. So here's with our bracket on there. You can see it's pretty tight in there, but it isn't touching. It's close, but it's not touching. And in here, I made this spot bigger with the die grinder so that this rests on the intake there. Then I removed some material up here so it wouldn't interfere with the top of this clamp. If you use a similar clamp, you might have to do the same thing. If you just go with the gear clamp or the other one, no issue, no problem there. Put the new thermostat in, and the way that goes is it goes to the pointy side up. Your spring is on the bottom. This is the part here that's going to get hot, open, and then release the coolant into the radiator. So I modified the piping that comes out of the intake here. Ordinarily, this hose just comes over here and then straight down, and here's the fitting that threads into that, and the hose just goes on there and it clamps on. So a couple things here. With this up and over, be easier to access this hose and work on it, replace it if you had to, once everything's all hooked up. The reason I'm doing this is we're gonna have the piping come up. It still goes to our heater core, and then above that we're gonna have our valve. I got this just kind of, I don't know where this handle is gonna end up staying, because we're still gonna put our hose on, we're still gonna put our bracket, alternator, things like that. So we'll find out in the end where we want this handle located. But point being is that it will remain closed, and then I put a plug in there for insurance. If the valve does leak, it's not going to leak past the plug. We want to create a high point past the hose, the top hose for the radiator, and we want a high point in here. We'd have another nipple in here, and we'd thread that in tight so it's sealed off there, right? We'd open our valve, and then we can pour our coolant in here, and we can bleed all the air out. Now, it's my belief that it seemed to have better heat in the new vehicles. Well, I think what they did was they achieved a higher vent on there, so when they're bleeding that air out of the system, they get all the air out because it's the highest point, and then it just works better. It's just more efficient, right? But yeah, that's to see what happens when it's all said and done. We'll see if that theory works out for us. We've got our thermostat in there, and we've got our filler neck on. Those are 5/16, so we got those torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. Then also what I did was I changed this temperature sensor here, because this is loose. This top piece ended up being loose on here. Got the bracket on there. One thing to note is you should probably put this bolt in first before you assemble this pipe. So I had to loosen off that bolt there, pull that out, put that bolt in, and then put it back in. The rest of your bolts, you got one on the bottom there, you got that one, you got this one over here, and then these two. And those should all be 9/16. Torque those down to 30 foot-pounds. And then you got one over here, which is a 5/16 for the dipstick tube here. Just go hand tight on that one. One last thing to think of here is before you assemble this, you want to make sure you got enough room to get at that bolt down there for this filler neck. If you don't, maybe you want to get in there with the die grinder and just chew a little material out, just to make sure that your socket's going to fit in there good. Because if you ever have to change your thermostat, you want to be able to get your tools in there without any problems. Now we've installed our alternator, and this was the moment where we had to readjust our valve back here. So now you can see that we can open and close the valve handle on that. We had to figure out what position we needed to put that when we were installing the alternator. So we got three connects here. We got 1, 2, 3, and that goes back to here. So 9/16 for all three of those. I just hand tight on this stuff. And then we went to our AC, and this is 5/16 for our 5 bolts here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, just put that in place, hand tight. We've got 2 wires to connect. This wire here that comes off the bottom goes underneath, and it comes out the back, and then that's where you're going to plug it in right there. And then we have this one here, if you disconnected it, but mine was disconnected, so this one here came off the wiring. That's kind of goes to the alternator over here. We've got our pulley here. That's going to be a 3/8, so that's a 9/16 socket. And then over here on the power steering pump, we've got 5/16 bolts, 1/2-inch wrench. Again, hand tight on all of this stuff. The top cover of the air box on here, so that goes on. You just put all those clips back on. We've got a connect right here, and then we connect it there, and that's done as well. have a little setback after we were done putting all this stuff together yesterday. Came back today and found this oil on the floor. When we look in here, we can see that the pump has cracked. So likely an old part fatigue. After bolting that up, it's cracked and broken, so we gotta replace this power steering pump. So as it was 3 bolts in the front here. Those were 5/16, so that'll be 1/2-inch socket, and then we gotta disconnect it here for our hose, and then this last hose back here is just a pinch clamp there. So that piece there had broken off of there when we're tightening it up. Old metal fatigue, I don't know. So first thing with that is as a little insurance for our next one, we got a little spacer in there, so then hopefully that'll save it from breaking again if a person so chooses to do that. This is our other pump here that we found out of another vehicle. That bushing would just fit right in there. It's a 5/16 bolt, so I just drilled that out one size bigger, give it a little extra space, and hopefully that would, in the future, is a little extra insurance to prevent this ear from breaking off when you're trying to torque that up. The next thing is that this is our replacement one, and as you can see, the pulley's damaged. We want to take the pulley off of the old one. This is the broken one, and this is the style of puller that you would use. It just catches in underneath that lip there. And then what I've done is I just got, that's a 3/8 bolt. There's this bore is threaded, 3/8 coarse thread. So I just put a bolt in there, and then I got this style puller on there. So you'd tighten that down, push on there. It's supposed to pull this pulley or shiv off. It's not working out very good for us. What I did was I took the torch and I just heated this bolt. I heated the top of the bolt to try and put that heat down there and break that up. We got some penetrating oil in. But in both cases, I can't get it to work. The puller is actually slipping off. Like it pulls until it slips off of there. Likely gonna have to get a new pump. But in the meantime, I guess what we could do is just put this broken one on there for now, so that we've got something until that arrives. Now this canister here, right there, once you remove these 2 clips, you could just pull that out that way. You can see where that fits into here. And there'd be your O-ring seal. For the clips here, you just get yourself a flat screwdriver, you put it in there, and you bring that up, that tang right here. So you pull that tang up, that's kind of what the lock is, and then you tap this clip that way. And then once the 2 clips come off, then you pull the canister out of that bore, this bore right here. So you've removed this clip, and then once you've removed those 2 clips, you take that canister and you pull it out this way. We put this power steering pump on here temporarily until we get a new unit with a good shiv on there. So it's 5/8 for this end of the hose here. Both of those bottom ones I do believe are an 18 millimeter. And then just a gear clamp on the back for the drain here. And then again, 1/2 inch for these 3 bolts holding it on. Installing the new rad here. The first thing you want to do is there's 2 pegs on the bottom. You want to line those up. They go through this metal bracket, and then they go into that rubber into the bottom of the rad support. There's one there, and then there's another one there. You want to make sure that your transmission cooler lines are gonna hook up, because sometimes when you buy a new rad for your vehicle, they'll have different connections on here for the transmission cooler. So we're lucky that these two fittings match what we have in the vehicle here. The next thing is there's a little metal clip in there, these things. So there's 2 of those that you'll remove off of the old radiator, and one of them goes there and the other one goes on this side, and that's gonna get your air conditioning coil bolted up to the back of the rad here. So we've got the pegs in the bottom, we got these 2 bolts here. Those should be 10 mil. Then you want to transfer these, basically vibration isolators, off of the old radiator and put those on there. And I do believe this is like an 8 millimeter nut. Should have a total of 12 nuts and bolts. Put the top bracket on here. We take a look inside. We've got these 2 here for our hood latch. We've got these 2 here for our grill support. We've got these 2 and those 2. That's 4 that hold down the top piece. Everything should be 10 mil except for these will be 12 mil for this one and this one. And that's the top of the radiator to this bracket here. And we have 2 more. We have 1 in behind here, and we have 1 there. We'll hook up these hoses here. We got the top rad hose here, and then these are these new style clamps that I got on there. So that's a 7/16 to tighten that up. That's a nylon lock nut there. So once you tighten that up, that'll hold it in place. We got 1 there. We got 1 down in there. And then on our bottom hose down there, we got our clamp there, and we got our clamp down at the bottom. And then we hooked up our transmission cooler lines here, 1 here and 1 down there. Also starting to reassemble the front end here. So just the grill, there's just 2 screws on the top. There's 1 there, 1 there, and then inside the grill here, there's a fastener there and a fastener there. I think that the factory fasteners will be screws. Mine were stripped out, so I just got those Allen head bolts in there. Also made a bit of a modification here. So this side marker light, there's a screw up top. There's another screw in there, deep in there. So what I did was, to fit my screwdriver in here easier, I just got the rotary tool and I just kind of made a little more room in there to get the screwdriver in, because without that, you'd have to pretty much disconnect the screw up here, and then hopefully you've got enough room to manipulate this thing to get your screwdriver in there. So I just made a little more space so I can get my screwdriver in on both sides. Just to install those just a little easier. To install that serpentine belt there, you're just gonna wrap it around the pulleys as it's supposed to be. And then here's your tensioner here. It's 15 millimeter, and you're gonna move this clockwise to pull that over, release the tension, and then slip your belt over there and then release it, and then should be good. We've got that fan on there. It didn't take very much, pretty much just screw it on by hand, and then just hang on to this pulley somehow and just give it a little wrap. So the last thing to do then is our skid plate on the bottom, and those are just 4 bolts. So you take those 2 bolts, this end slotted right there. You can see the slots. So you loosely install them bolts on this side over here, and then engage that, and then put those 2 bolts up there, tighten everything down.